Invierte la relación.
Welcome everyone. Sorry for the delay. The traffic was really bad, but we are already here. So, Embajador, ¿quién es? Embajador. Allá están las sillas reservadas. Well, first of all, it's impossible to start this event without thinking in the terrible events that took place last week in Boston. Our condolences for all the community because we really feel a part of it. So our condolences, and this is the first thing that I want to say. Then after that, we have to start this amazing event that is really a dream come true for us. Thank you all of you for being here at the second Colombian conference at Harvard and MIT. I want to express my gratitude with the organization team. First, with the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies for having us here and for being a great part. We did a very good partnership with you, and thank you, Marily, for being here with us. To the Harvard Colombian Student Society, the Colombian Association of MIT, our embassy for your support, and the people that work very hard in the consulate to make this event come true. Our panelists, thank you for being here to take this long trip to be here with us. And also I want to say thank you to the support that we received from the University of Los Andes. Thank you very much, Pablo, for being here. And of course, to the Berkeley School of Music. They are going to bring us a very good concert tomorrow. So I really want you to all enjoy that event. I don't want to take more time. This is just a welcome. But it's a pleasure to see you all here just because you want to know about our wonderful country. So with no more than that, you have the programs in your hands, so I don't need to read any program here. I want to welcome our ambassador in Washington, D.C., Carlos Urrutia.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that it's always a pleasure to be in Cambridge, surrounded by so many illustrious professors, as well as by students coming from all over the world, including Colombia, of course. I'd like to say, as our Consul General said, I'd like to express our condolences for the events that took place last week. As you know, we Colombians have suffered many times through that. And so it really touches our heart to see that something like what happened last week affected so many people in the community, in the Boston community. So again, my condolences to everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you today. First, I want to thank our host and partner for this conference, the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, particularly its director, Marily Grindle, for her willingness to support this event. I also would like to highlight the leadership of Mónica Pinzón, our Consul General. She has worked tirelessly to organize the conference and has undoubtedly been an instrumental to its success. But I also want to commend the enthusiasm of the young men and women of the Colombian Student Association of MIT and Harvard. They have been a driving force behind this program and their respective institutions. This is a fine example, in my view, of how Colombian students abroad can stay in touch with our country and still contribute to advance its agenda. Today, most analysts agree that Colombia is a key emerging player. We are South America's third largest economy, and by many counts, we may even be the second largest in South America. We have been growing steadily and faster than the regional average. We have made great strides in restoring security and stability, strengthening democratic institutions, and advancing policies that have led to significant social progress and economic growth. What we are experiencing and cultivating now is the new Colombia, a nation with a progressive agenda to create a more just and inclusive society, a modern state, and a safe and secure country where all Colombians will find that there is indeed opportunity. Events like this today are important to foster open interdisciplinary dialogue on the most critical issues surrounding social and economic policies in Colombia. Discussions will take place in 3 panels, each comprised of academics, Colombian policymakers, and experts on their respective areas of discussion: poverty, transportation infrastructure, and post-conflict. The first panel will focus on discussing Colombia's strategy to overcome poverty. Let me say that this is a very timely discussion. Social policy is front and center in this government's political agenda. As a matter of fact, we learned just last week that 1.7 million Colombians have been lifted out of poverty over the past 2 years. This afternoon's panel will address the future of transportation infrastructure in Colombia and this government's efforts to build a reliable nationwide transportation system. As you know, aside from resolving our internal conflict and reducing poverty, there is not a more pressing task for Colombia than to significantly upgrade our infrastructure. It is a true bottleneck that hampers our development and limits our efforts to increase productivity, an essential factor to be able to take advantage, for instance, of our network of free trade agreements to aggressively expand our markets. And I would give you one further thought. A modern and efficient infrastructure will play a key role in making vigorous presence in vast areas of our geography, which, by the way, will most likely contribute significantly to drive violence away from the countryside. Under the leadership of President Santos, Colombia is embarking on its most ambitious infrastructure development plan in its recent history. Its objective is to leapfrog competitiveness by increasing investment in highways, railways, ports, and airports from 1% per annum of GDP to 3% per annum of GDP. A key component of this plan is the 4th generation of road concessions, a set of 30 public-private partnerships worth more than $25 billion. I have no doubt that today's discussion will provide valuable insights as Colombia embarks on this infrastructure revolution. Tomorrow's panel on our challenges in a post-conflict scenario will be divided in 2 sessions, one focused on the future of illegal armed groups, and another devoted to analyzing the path toward justice and reconciliation. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no better timing to engage on these issues as we speak today. As we speak today, negotiations between our government and members of the FARC are ongoing in La Habana. This is not the first time that we have embarked on such an initiative. However, President Santos and our chief negotiator believe that there is today a real window of opportunity to create a lasting peace in Colombia. The President set the stage from the very outset. A clear agenda of 5 items was agreed upon with FARC after 18 months of secret negotiations. This agenda includes one essential point. The goal is to end Colombia's 60-year armed conflict once and for all. In the meantime, the Colombian government is simultaneously implementing an ambitious progressive social agenda aimed at addressing the roots of our armed conflict. It delineates a path forward for a peace-building process and the ground for a sustainable post-conflict phase. The final panel tomorrow will discuss these policies. I'd like to point to the following. It is estimated that the Victims and Land Restitution Law will invest more than $32 billion over a 10-year period in programs focusing on our close to 5 million victims. Just last year, the government already provided compensation to more than 110,000 victims. There are, of course, many other topics worth raising in a scenario such as this conference. Matters such as Colombia's macroeconomic achievements. As a matter of fact, this week, Standard & Poor's announced that it raised Colombia's foreign currency ratings, highlighting our country's stronger fiscal profile, growing domestic capital markets, and favorable long-term prospects for GDP growth. As a matter of fact, we reached for the first time in many, many years a fiscal surplus of close to 0.5% in the year 2012. What I believe it's important to highlight is that Colombia is decisively moving forward towards lasting peace and prosperity. I encourage everyone here today and tomorrow to participate and engage in these discussions. This is a unique opportunity to have a meaningful discussion to help Colombians focus on the right issues. Again, thank you very much for making this possible, and thank you for your presence, your active participation, and, of course, for your invitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today in our second Colombian seminar in Harvard and MIT. I want to thank you, our panelists, Lina, Luis, Adriana, and Professor Ocampo, for joining us to debate the Colombian strategy to overcome poverty. Our moderator today is Professor Mary Lee Grindle. She is an Edward Mason Professor of International Development and the Director of the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies. So I thank you very much, Professor Grindle, for joining and hosting us, and I give you the floor so we can start the debate.
Good morning, Mr. Ambassador, Ms. Consul General. It is, and all of you who are here, it's a real pleasure to welcome you and to be able to thank the organizers. It's a real privilege for the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies to be one of the sponsors of this annual Columbia Conference. I want to say a special word of thanks to the students from both Harvard and MIT for showing us that indeed institutions can come together and work together to make good things happen. The purpose, the mission of the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies is to expand the space for Latin America here at Harvard University, while at the same time helping Harvard become more present in Latin America in ways that we hope make a positive contribution to the peoples and countries and cultures of the region. I think this conference helps us achieve both of those parts of our mission. And I'm very, very much looking forward to the hearing the scholarship and the commentaries that will be presented today and tomorrow. Let me invite you during your breaks and lunches to go up 2 floors to where the David Rockefeller Center offices are and wander the halls and look at a wonderful exhibit called Colombia, Tierra de Luz. It's on the walls. It's spectacular. There's even a video presentation there. I think you will find it that it will make you nostalgic for those of you who are from Colombia, for your country, and it really is a spectacular exhibit. Paula Ibarra, who has actually created and built the Andes Initiative, of which this is part, and been an absolute central part of the Arts at Dr. Class initiative that has brought us Colombia Tierra de Luz. I'm sure would be happy to show you the exhibit and tell you a bit about it during any of the breaks or at lunch. Paula, if you could just raise your hand so everyone sees you. Okay, wonderful. We turn to our panel then. The 2000s have been a period of really quite remarkable and positive change in levels of poverty in many countries in Latin America, Colombia among them. One measure says that, or tells us that poverty has dropped from 42% to 34% of the population in just a few years. That's a significant drop. Yet, as we all are aware, inequality persists, and Latin America continues to be the region in the world most noted for its degrees of inequality. Now, like many countries, Colombia has had excellent economic growth in the past several years and has also introduced a number of public policies to deal with widespread poverty and inequality. Our panelists today have been asked to think about this change and what has been happening in terms of poverty and inequality in Colombia, and also to think more specifically about three questions. They've been asked to think about how well designed are the public policies to overcome poverty in Colombia? Are they sustainable? Do they address issues of inequality as well as poverty? Secondly, how do the roles played by the private and public sectors complement each other? And thirdly, focusing in on what is now called the base of the pyramid, where can sustainable business opportunities be found in Colombia that can be implemented and focus on this base? We have a very distinguished panel. Their complete bios are in this wonderful brochure. I wish we could do more of these kinds of things for our other conferences. It looks so very official. We will go in the order in which I introduce them rather than in the order in which they are sitting. I won't say a great deal about each one, but I do encourage you to take a look in the brochure and read about their distinguished career. We will have, first of all, Lina Maria Castaño, who is Deputy Director for Social Development and Quality of Life at the National Planning Department. Then Luis Gallo, who is the General Director of the Social Development Bank in Colombia. We'll move then to Adriana Hoyos, who is the Senior Fellow at the Center for International Development here at Harvard University. And then to Jose Antonio Ocampo, who is the Professor of Professional Practice in International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, and who is here for this conference, but also to celebrate the publication of a new book. We're very, very pleased to have all of you. My final word is for the panelists. You may think I'm just a nice, smiley person, but I have to tell you I am a vicious moderator, and I watch the clock very closely. So you may be hearing from me. I think we have agreed that the presentation should be 15 minutes, and on we go. Thank you all again very, very much for coming, and we look forward to the comments of this wonderful panel. Then Lina Maria.
Turn this one.
Good morning to everybody. I would like to say in Spanish as well. Buenos días a todos. Thank you for the invitation. I'm here on the behalf of the National Planning Department. I would like to talk to you about the poverty reduction strategy that we are using right now in the country. In the meantime, okay, we just find the presentation. I would like to excuse in advance for my English. If you have any problem, follow me. I strongly recommend to read the slides. All of them are in English, okay? Okay. I'm going to talk first, what are the channels through poverty can be reduced. This is, of course, just a theory that we use in our planning department. There are a lot of theories of what have to do in order to reduce poverty, but this is just an idea that we are trying to implement in the country. We'd like to let that clear. Then, how the country is monitoring and evaluating all the strategies that we are implementing right now. What are the results? What are the reasons that we think that are behind all the results, the positive results that we have right now in the country? But of course, we have still a lot of challenges, and that's going to be the end of the presentation. Then, we have two channels. One is the direct one. That is the channel that all of us used to know. That is, we have to grow. We have the income has to grow. Then we can reduce income poverty. However, all depends of the distribution of the money or the distribution of the income and the growth in the country. And the other way is a new way that we are using right now to measure poverty. That is the direct channels. How can we provide to the people social protection, housing, education, basic service? And we have a new measure to look at that is called multidimensional poverty index. Let's talk a little bit more about the direct channel. For the direct channel is all around the social protection system in Colombia. I know that sometimes when we talk about the social protection in the country, we think that is something we have a lot of problems, but we have earned a lot in these years. For the first part, that is the social security related to health and pensions. The second one about the access to assets for the people. The third one is the human capital, all the strategy in education. And the last one is pretty important, especially after the ola invernal, that is the risk management under crisis. But not all the people can access to the social protection system. We have to move to a social promotion system. That means that for some people that are the more poor and the vulnerable, we need to focus on them with a different strategy. We have one that I hope that you have heard, that is Red Unidos, before called Red Juntos, that is for reducing extreme poverty. And the idea is to help this group of people to have a social mobility and income generation to help them to move from promotion to social protection. What kind of programs are we talking for the vulnerable and the poor? The first one in the social security is the subsidized health system and the elderly pensions. For this second one, the country has done a big improvement on that one. We have a new program that is called BEPS. There is benefits for the poor, and we hope that for the 2015 we have at least the 70% of the people that is out of this one with coverage in elderly pensions. The second one is access to assets, that we have new housing. We have now free house, but as well as subsidies for the renewal and a new house. Human capital, I think that the last year you talked here about the early childhood strategy, care strategy. That is one of the main action that we're doing right now for the kids, for the children. The school nourishment loans for higher education. And the last one, that is related to risk management. We have a special program for victims, internal displaced people, and as well that people have suffered from oil invernal or other actions. And how we find these people? We find it with an instrument that is called CISBEN, that is the targeting system in the country. We just not have these ideas, we also have to monitoring all the time. For that one, the country has created 2 committees. One that is presided by the president and all the ministry, and check every 2 months how is the country doing about poverty and what are the actions that we have to do in order to correct any problem that we have during the year. This is a special committee that is the leaders of the committee is the National Planning Department and the presidents. And we also have another committee, not so important, but with technical people to talk about the results in income poverty and in multidimensional poverty. Right now, we're trying to have a very accountable data about poverty in the country. We have 2 different entities doing all the estimation for the poverty in Colombia, and a group of experts that are from universities as well, from the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, in order to check that all the data is the correct one, and to work through that for action in the country. So let's see a little bit about the results. For income poverty, the last result that is from last week, we have reduced poverty from 40 to 32.7%. That means 1.7 million of people have left income poverty in the last 4 years. The goal for this government is 32 in 2014, so we're pretty close in just 2 years to get there. Then we have extreme poverty. This one, I would like to say, even though we have reducing for 12 to 10, and the goal is 9.9, here we still have a lot of work to do, because if you can see between 2011 and 2012, the reduction was just 0.2. That means that in some way, maybe because of the level or for other reasons that we're going to see later, we still have something that is stopping the extreme poverty in subgroup to reduce. Gini, the inequality in the country. I'm pleased to announce that we are no more the second unequal country in Latin America. Now we're like the sixth one with this reduction, according to CEPAL, I hope. But we can check it. We just reduced to 2.1. No, we still have a lot of work to do, but we are not the worst anymore. Okay. Yeah. What are the reasons for this result? The first one related to inequality is about that the income per capita for people in the first quintile has grown 30.2, and the richest quintile just 2.3. That means that all the growth in some way was pro-poor. Try to increase the income in the first quintile, on the most poorest. Multidimensional poverty. Even though these results are important, we are working in a new measure to help us to evaluate social policy. For that, we work with the Oxford University in design a new index called the Multidimensional Poverty Index for Colombia. This index gathered the main dimension of the quality of life. This one. First one is about educational condition, the second one childhood and youth, labor, health, and housing and public utilities. These are all the dimensions and the variables that we use with the Multidimensional Poverty Index. And a person is considered poor if has a deprivation for more than 5 of the 15 variables. For this, the results are better for the, than for the income poverty. we have reduced it from 30.4 to 27. Even though during the 2011 we have a small reduction, for this year when the most of the social policy program has been implemented, we have a reduction that is quite important. 1.27 million people have left multidimensional poverty in the last 2 years. Why? Why they have with this good performance? These are every variable. You have here Spanish and English. For the first one, that is the early childhood care, all the actions have reduced the children that have barriers in this topic, who have reduced it for 11 to 9.4, as well in health insurance, illiteracy, in education. We have improved in 3 main actions of the government: health, early childhood care, and education, these 3. And what happened that? First, related to labor, we have a reduction on the unemployment rate that is bigger in the poorest than in the richest group. And as well, the labor market performance has benefits the poorest household. As you can see in this one, the labor income has grown more in the first quintile than in the last one. Other point is the formal job creation. Because in Colombia, you can say, okay, you are reducing unemployment with what? Formal or informal jobs. That we see here is that the formal jobs are growing more in the first group, in the more poor people, than in the more riches. Then, just to finish, because it's just 15 minutes, what are the main challenges that we see right now? The first one related to income poverty is we have to reduce extreme poverty in the rural areas. When you see the reduction in the extreme poverty that was lower the last year, is because we have a certain problem in the rural areas. That's the reason that tomorrow panel is so important. That is about post-conflict and all the agreement with FARC, because that's one of the points we have to work. At the same time, we have to close the gap between urban and rural poverty, because this year is bigger than the year before, and we always start to get apart in these results. Increase formal jobs, that's the only way that is sustainable, the strategy, and of course, keep reducing inequality. Even though we are better now, we still have to work on that. About multidimensional poverty, we have 3 things that are important and make it the strategy sustainable in the time. Improve educational achievement, make progress on house conditions, and third, increase coverage of early childhood care. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you, Lina Maria Castaño. That was an excellent presentation, and you set a model in terms of sticking to the 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Luis Bayo, and as that is getting set up, is there someone who can turn on the screens in the front?
Okay, good morning. Thank you very much for this invitation. I think this is going to be a very interesting debate because some of the figures will be somewhat different, and I will help in that regard. I would like to, let's see how this moves. Okay, I'm going to cover several points. I'm going to look at poverty statistics, but from a regional and city perspective, and I think that's going to tell us a little bit more clearly what's happening in Colombia. Then review quickly some of the structures that the Colombian government is using to reduce extreme poverty. I'll give you some views as to why I think poverty and extreme poverty still plague Colombia in many ways, and how jointly with the private sector and the social sector, we can work together towards solving those challenges. I will briefly present to you a new endeavor that we're putting together, which is a social investment bank. And if time allows, 2-3 minutes, I would like to share from a more personal perspective how I think many of you can get involved in helping our country be one of the most successful countries in the current century. So the problem with these statistics in Colombia is that if you look at them from a national perspective, they don't look so bad. But when you look at them from a regional perspective, things get complicated. First thing that happens is, yes, we're moving in the right direction with inequality. There'll be a debate, I'm sure, whether we are at 0.54% of Gini or higher. Colombia changed the way it measures, but definitely there's been improvement. Problem is inequality within the regions. This is a graph that shows Casanare at $22,000 income per capita. That's, not too distant from the US. But on the other extreme, you have Baupés with $1,704. And you see the huge difference between regions in Colombia. And even in Casanare, that high income is extremely concentrated because it's, basically coming from oil. If you look at poverty by states and cities, you have, figures as high as 65% in Chocó, Cauca, and you have cities like Bucaramanga and Bogota below 10%. So, in fact, some of these cities look better than the US in some perspectives, but the inequalities are huge. And extreme poverty, likewise. We have, as high as 35% in some departments and as low as 1% in Bucaramanga. With respect to the poverty line, yes, it's falling. On a rural basis, it's still quite high. On an urban context, it's improving rapidly. But again, it varies significantly whether you live in a large town, a large city, or in the countryside. Let me see if I can go back one. GDP per capita in terms of comparing Colombia with many countries in the world, Bogota and the triangle between Cali, Medellin, and the coffee region looks like a Middle Eastern European country. It's fairly developed. But when you look at places like Chocó, let's see, Chocó looks very much like sub-Saharan Africa. And this is the real challenge. How do you take investment from the public sector, from the private sector, to the marginal regions of Colombia? Part of the reduction that is happening in Colombia is the easy part. It's what, as we call in consulting and investment banking, the low-hanging fruits. But it's going to be a much more significant challenge to take that equality and development to the rest of the country. And that's where this government has a huge challenge, and it's closely related to the peace talks. Now, this is a little bit what Lina was explaining, how the government is trying to promote what it's basically centered called democratic prosperity. It's trying to spread the marmalade, as a recent Minister of Finance said, to the different regions of Colombia. And that requires a very complex system. And let me just walk through what's being done. This is the key components of the social investment strategy of the Colombian government under the DPS, Departamento de Prosperidad Social, which is kind of a supra-ministry that involves the early childhood and childhood coverage in the Instituto Colombiano de Bienestar Familiar, the effort of consolidation, which means taking the state to those municipalities that used to be controlled by the illegal armed forces, part of the restoration of victims. We have 3, 4, 5 million victims in Colombia that still haven't been restituted. And finally, the Agencia Nacional de Superación de la Pobreza Extrema, which is a very sophisticated and probably unique entity in the world that is doing amazing work in trying to deal with extreme poverty. And let's look into that one, which is basically the Unidos effort. What they're doing, and this is amazing when you look at it in detail, they have been able to put in a database every single family that is in extreme poverty in Colombia. And by doing that, they know who lives in each house, the ages, the state of each member of that household, and therefore, how do they need to work to take them out of poverty? They create family plans that they monitor on a bi-monthly basis with 10,000 social workers that are working throughout Colombia, and basically in terms of promoting superación, promotion, and then keeping them out of poverty, which is as important as taking them out of poverty. This effort, and I won't read all of this, is divided in the multidimensional factors of poverty. There's 9 categories, 47 variables, and for each family, this is measured on a bi-monthly level. And this is really, I think, unique in the world, and I think it's going to, create some significant results rather soon. Basically, through the different 9 variables, with support, and with taking the offer of the government in a more efficient way, that's part of the reason why things are happening the way they're beginning to happen in Colombia. The challenge and the problem is that it's not an easy job by no means. There's 24 government entities involved in providing these services, and getting them to work together, coordinating them, making sure they don't repeat and compete, it's a huge undertaking. And typically, as in any government, and in our country it's no exception, not always entities within a government talk to each other. The 5 or 6 key ministers dealing with social intervention don't necessarily work together. Mr. Germán Vargas Lleras, who launched the 100,000 free homes, doesn't necessarily interact closely with the Minister of Education to make sure that the 1,000 schools that are needed will be built soon in Colombia to support this type of effort. Finally, the government has kind of a grade matrix in which they keep score as to how things are going, and things are going better in terms of national statistics. But again, I would like to emphasize that on a regional level, there's huge inequalities and huge inefficiencies still happening that need to be resolved. So let's get into some of the ideas that I think perpetuate why we have extreme poverty in Colombia. In my opinion, there's basically 4 categories. The categories of inequality, they're evident. We still have a very unequal country from many perspectives, from educational perspective, from infrastructure perspective, even from the high unequal tax system that we still have. Despite the reform that was recently approved, it still doesn't address correctly the inheritance issue. Basically, wealth is transferred tax-free in Colombia from one generation to another generation. The second big category are conditions of inefficiency and insufficiency in terms of public spending. For the first time, at least in my historical memory, Colombia is beginning to have more money that can be spent. Part of the reason why there was a surplus on behalf of the public budget is not so much that we were extremely careful as to how it was spent, it's a little bit more because it wasn't possible to spend it all. It takes a lot of effort, knowledge, teams, capable public sector employees to be able to spend the type of money that the Colombian government is beginning to receive. Thirdly, and this is by no means a minor cause, we still have a lot of collateral damage from the internal conflict. Even though the paramilitary may have demobilized to a great extent, they were somewhat replaced by the Bacrins, and as long as the drug trade continues to affect our country as it does, it will generate extreme poverty as people are displaced, not only in the rural, but also in the urban context. And finally, the unequal presence of the private sector and the social sector in different regions of Colombia. If you go to certain departments, in the Pacific coast, even in the Atlantic coast, there are cities in which you have a few, if not a couple companies, and you have almost no nonprofit presence, and that needs to be resolved. It's easier to come to Boston than to go to Quibdó and do some work in Quibdó. It doesn't take a lot of intelligence to figure out what needs to be done. We need to continue growing on a sustained basis, but that model has to generate more employment and more formal employment. We need to increase efficient social spending. I still feel that Colombia is a little bit timid in the way that it spends money. We need to build more infrastructure, and it's like the time value of money. It's better to spend it now and to resolve conditions than to wait and make sure that you have enough money for the next 20 or 30 years. You need to increase the presence of the private sector, throughout Colombia, and you need to find new and more innovative ways of doing social investing, very closely tied in public-private partnerships that are beginning to be structured correctly in Colombia. And in that respect, in a theoretical concept, we need what we're beginning to promote as transformational social change. Transformational social change is efforts that truly transform a country, a region, or a city. And if we look at the work we do from the nonprofit sector, we're still not close to doing transformational work. We do, high impact work in some cases, but it doesn't really transform much. And to transform, you need to work in very close ties with the government. The government truly has the budget. There's no comparison, no matter how generous the Colombians become, to be able to channel this type of investment. And in that respect, let me share with you what we're doing from the Social Investment Bank. The Social Investment Bank is the last sequence of an effort that has begun in the last 12, 13 years of creating a number of new social entities in Colombia, beginning with Compartamos con Colombia, Conexión Colombia, Give to Colombia, Inversor, which is the first impact investment fund, Filantropía Transformadora, which tries to convince wealthy Colombians to invest more, and finally the Social Investment Bank. Why is this important? Because right now, and not only in Colombia but in the world, we are at a tipping point. There's never been so much money potentially available for the social sector. Movements like the Giving Pledge in the US, or the wealth created in Colombia, and the generational change that is happening open an opportunity for huge amounts of money to come into the social sector. We have growing and larger impact investment funds. Bilateral cooperation still continues. Governments have higher amounts of funds. The problem is, where do you channel those funds to? And in the social sector, things tend to be small. Things tend to be not scalable, and therefore, when someone with significant resources wants to make a very aggressive investment, there's a limit. There's huge bottlenecks, and that's what we're trying to do. How we do it, we've identified a number of areas. I'll just highlight 2 or 3. Helping wealthy Colombians contribute more is a challenge. People typically don't give more because they don't know how, they don't know with whom, and they are afraid of creating dependencies. And this is very similar to what you do as a private banker, helping people find investments in the social sector, and that's an area that we're working very hard. We're working in promoting impact investment funds. We're working in transforming nonprofit institutions into more company type of entities, and we would like to help companies migrate to the triple bottom line focus. How we do it is important. We are a group of Colombians in the process of being formed. There'll be 15 of us. Right now we are 11. Some of the names there are fairly well known to some of you. But in essence, these are people that have been very successful in business, that are very closely related to social investment, and that are in certain range of years that allows us to work together for the next 20 years. Some of the most significant NGOs are present in this group, and we come together 3 or 4 times a year. We have a very competent team of professionals, people that have graduated from schools like Harvard, MIT, Stanford, that have chosen to work in this area instead of at McKinsey or at an investment bank. And we are very active. We've been in business for 2 years. Some of the processes that we're working involve social housing, involve helping Pro Familia become more of a company, creating creative funding mechanisms for education through Lumni, for example. We're creating a social asset investment REIT, we call Fondo País, which will basically help universities and hospitals become more efficient, and we're working in things related to the health sector. 2 minutes and I'll finish. This is something on a more personal basis. From what I've done in life as an investment banker, I've had the privilege to work with a lot of very successful professionals and business leaders. And typically people seek 3 key areas in their lives. They seek professional and business success. They seek personal and family happiness, if I may use that word. And typically they start thinking of how to transcend, how to give back to society, sometimes even in their high school years, many times in their college years. but eventually, towards midlife, you start thinking, how can I contribute to my country, to my city, to my company, whatever. What happens in practice is that people, like the ones sitting here, tend to spend huge amounts of time working, studying, and devoting time and effort and passion to companies or to institutions. And usually those institutions or companies are not yours. They belong to someone else, but you tend to feel that if you don't work 14 or 16 hours a week, 7 days a week, that company is going to go bankrupt. And you tend to postpone giving time to your family and to yourself, and definitely you postpone getting involved. That's something that one thinks it's for wealthy people in their old age, and definitely that's not the case. I truly encourage all of you, no matter how young or advanced in life we are, to get involved, to find a way of balancing your passions and your times between starting business and the social front. And I think those three key circles should not be isolated. There's ways in which you can bring them together. It's a process in which I've been working very actively since about 10 years ago. My wife, who's here, has been consulted permanently on how to do this. It's not easy. It's a challenge. You have to be creative, but there are ways. And just as an example, the Social Investment Bank is a consequence of figuring out how to merge the professional business in which I've been for the last 30 years with the social work in which I've been involved for the last 12 years. So I want to leave you with that, not advice, but suggestion, because it really makes you a happier person, a much more fulfilled person, and our country needs you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis Gallo. And we move on to Adriana Hoyos.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Ambassador Urrutia, Consul General, and Professor Grindle, and the group of Colombian students at Harvard and MIT for inviting me to speak today. I'm truly honored to be part of this amazing panel. And today, I'd like to talk about some practical approaches to combat poverty. And first, I'd like to begin by briefly reviewing some facts. The first of the 8 United Nations Millennium Development Goals to eradicate extreme poverty by 2015 was met 3 years in advance. But yet, almost 6 billion people still live on less than $10 a day. Half of the world still lived on less than $250 a day, and almost 20% of the global population remains below the extreme poverty line. And despite the remarkable progress that the world has made in fighting extreme poverty, still around the 700 million people who moved above the extreme poverty lines are still poor by the standards of the middle and high income countries. So let's talk about billions of people. 1.1 entered the 21st century unable to read or write. 1.6 billion don't have any type of shelter. 6.5 don't go to college. 5.5 don't have access to a computer. 6.1 don't have any access to safe drinking water. 1.1 billion are undernourished. And about children. So 1 billion children, which is 1 out of 2 children in the world, live in poverty. And too many millions live without any adequate shelter, safe water, health services, and unfortunately, around 30,000 kids die per day before they reach the age of 5. So this is an interesting graphic of if the world was 100 people. But we often define poverty in monetary terms, and yet income is only one variable. Poverty is a condition about the lack of choice, the lack of access, the lack of inclusion, and of course the lack of freedom. And to calculate this broad poverty concept better, as Lina mentioned, we have some innovative tools like the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI. The MPI is a global poverty measure developed by Oxford for the United Nations 3 years ago. And it reflects the multiple deprivations that a poor person faces with respect of disempowerment, education, poor quality of work, threat from violence, and living standards in general. Talking about, regarding the world income distribution, just 11 million people or 0.15% of the world, control $42 trillion, or 2/3 of the world GDP. And even a tinier group of people, which is 0.001%, controls 1/3 of that amount. This is an interesting graphic that shows us the amount of millionaires by country. So the United States heads the list with more than 3 million millionaires, and is the first in the list, and almost doubles Japan, which is the second in the list. Well, using the world's Gini coefficient, we observed that the poorest 40% of the world's population accounts for just 5% of the world global income, and the richest 20% accounts for 75% of the world's income. So where's Colombia in terms of poverty? And of course, I'm going to go really fast through this section because not only Lina and Luis mentioned it, but I'm sure it's going to be on the center of our discussion later. This is Colombia's number of poor at $125 a day, $250 a day, $5 a day. And this is a combined graphic of the three indicators. This is Colombia's Gini coefficient. Again, good discussion. And even though it has been reduced, I'm sure we have still a long way to go with that. This is Colombia's poverty gap, which measures the intensity of poverty. And this is Colombia's multidimensional poverty index, which Lina already explained. And we have all the indexes by household education, childhood and youth conditions, work, health, public services, and housing conditions. This is the incidence of deprivation by indicators. And this is the composition of the multidimensional poverty index. And well, this is unreadable here, but it's the MPI across subnational regions in Colombia. I'm happy to share the presentation afterwards. So basically, what would be a good tool or a set of tools to make poverty history through good governance? So I'm going to share with you 4 steps that we've been researching on, which are specially designed for governments or institutions to tackle poverty. The first one is to accelerate market-driven partnerships. Second, enabling an efficient interaction of connections. Third, learning-driven assessment. And fourth, measuring impact. The first step is to implement accelerating market-driven partnerships, which is a unique way of creating value through uncommon alliances. Today, similar challenges are faced by business and government. Government cannot solve emerging problems with outdated systems and solutions. And businesses, every time more and more, will need to adapt as resources are increasingly constrained and new markets emerge. Innovative market-driven public-private partnerships, PPPs, are a key approach to unlocking high economic value while delivering social impact. The second step is to create an efficient interaction of connections between the stakeholders and the system. So while we're mapping the stakeholders, this is a system which, like a circuit, requires an entire set of interactive connections and a good flow between them, where accountability must be used to induce agents of state to take desired actions. So you can see here, we group the stakeholders in citizens and divide them in non-poor and poor, differentiating between coalition and inclusion. Then we have the government, and we have politicians and policymakers. Sometimes they do both. And then we have the providers, which are the frontline organizations. And here we can see the flow of the mapping of these stakeholders. But to understand a good system, we have to understand a defective system. In social projects, inputs and outputs are pretty far removed from the outcomes that people really care about. For example, if my children are learning, are healthy, etc. Citizens have little opportunity to hold providers accountable themselves via influencing policymakers. They have very little information about the world, the state of the world, including how their situations compares to others, how realities compare to promises, and what are their rights and entitlements. Information can help users change the situation, and it can help policymakers and providers do a better job too. More carefully measurable standards of performance are really, really necessary precondition for accountability and improved service quality. So, what does an accountable system look like? Well, in an accountable system, people know their choices and influence change by influencing providers and policymakers. Policymakers reflect this voice in their decision making, and because they understand how well providers are doing in terms of outcomes and impact, not only money spent, they can make higher quality decisions and are able to hold providers accountable for meeting their obligations. Here is how to design an efficient system. So we have 2 steps, which are inform and empower. To design an effective and sustainable system, you have to make sure new information contains provider performance to allow monitoring. Make sure information is publicly accessible and useful. Train local government and civil society to track and rate the service outcomes, and train new leaders to sustain the work over time. Here we have in order to make a system work, we have to create and share a plan that includes all stakeholders. As I mentioned, government, providers, and people are the groups that we're mentioning here. And we have to set priorities from the beginning to impact measurement, including all these stakeholders, until we identified which are the replication identifications. The third step is to integrate learning drive assessment into the strategy lifecycle. Assessment is often considered the last stage in the process, but it should be built into the program design, implementation, and execution. Once assessment results are collected and interpreted, the lessons need to feed back into the system. These are the learning-driven assessment steps. Here, and involve stakeholders at every stage, design the most credible assessment that is feasible, identify gaps in existing knowledge, understanding what works and why, and learning from failures. Don't measure everything. Focus assessment on information that will truly be used. Collaborate, don't dictate. Co-create the assessment with program leaders. Ensure that you have enough resources to execute. Build off and build up. Don't assess what is already known. Look beyond your own organization for answers. Borrow, don't reinvent. This means repurpose, benchmark existing tools, and foster a learning culture. That is very important in our country. I don't think we have that kind of culture right now. And implementation really needs leadership that values learning in order to succeed. So here we have created this matrix that makes it easy to set portfolios objectives by identifying the program's type of social intervention and staging the solution, which is also important. Here, it's relevant to develop separate assessment plans and coordinate them then into one single plan towards the end of the process. This left column shows the stages of the solution, which are to frame the problem, develop an approach, demonstrate and refine a solution, and scale and sustain it, and the row at the top shows the type of social interventions. So this is the same matrix, and when this is populated, it describes the universe of initiatives based on the type of intervention and how to frame them according to the stage of the solution. It represents a full range of the social sector work, regardless of field, geography, or target. The type of interventions here are knowledge development, product and service development and delivery, capacity and skills enhancement, behavioral change, enabling of systems and infrastructure, and policy development and implementation. So here, if you want to take a look at one of the examples, I'm sorry I don't have a pointer, but let's take the frame of the problem, and the first column, which is knowledge and development. Oh my God, I did something strange there, okay. Here we can see that you describe your problem and you can generate a set of questions that help you develop this problem and put it to the next level. Okay. Well, even though this chart is not very readable here, it's just a way of illustrating what I was telling you about the generalized learning questions to guide assessment for each initiative. Well, the fourth step is, after testing your interventions, to measure impact and document learning and best practices. So, having applied the inform and power steps that I mentioned before, people are ready to understand, evaluate, measure, and suggest what should remain and what should improve or change. Impact measurement inputs should include all stakeholders, as I already mentioned, to implement accordingly. So I can later explain that better. So to finalize, these ideas summarize briefly what I just described in this system and this model. Identify the need, frame the problem, convene all actors, design an intervention or interventions, develop an approach, thank you, demonstrate and refine the solution, measure impact, document best practices, replicate, escalate, and sustain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adriana Hoyos. And now, Jose Antonio Ocampo.
Well, thank you, Mary Lee, and thanks to the ambassador, to the consul general, to the students from Harvard and MIT for inviting me today to this, very interesting event. I was, I asked to be last, so and interestingly, I prepared not a PowerPoint, but some concepts that I want to, and I was afraid that some of them will be not repetitive, but they're actually not. So let me start with, I want to make basically 3 points. That the problem is inequality, not poverty. So if we fight inequality, we will achieve poverty. At our level of development, we should have much lower levels of poverty if we had a better distribution of income. The second is that long-term efforts is what matters. So this is a strategy that has to be taken consistently through time by several governments. And I'll point out that there are several successes and several failures that we should look at. And the third is that the patterns of economic growth matter, and there are some question marks that I want to raise in that regard. So let me start by saying that I will not enter into the discussion of whether we are the worst or not worst income distribution of Latin America. I categorize actually Latin American countries by income distribution in 3 categories: the terrible, the very bad, and the bad. Even the best, which are Costa Rica and Uruguay, are bad by international standards. That's why even the best are not very good. And we belong to the terrible. I mean, we compete with Honduras, with Guatemala for the worst income distribution of Latin America. Furthermore, there are these new numbers that are very popular now in the discussions on inequality, which is the percentage of income of the highest 1% of the population. It's very common in the debates in the United States, in industrial countries. They don't come from household surveys, but rather from looking at income tax returns, because the high incomes are never reflected in the Gini coefficients estimated by household data, and that's why all Gini coefficients underestimate the magnitude of poverty, and by significant numbers. For example, in the United States, a normal Gini will come slightly under 0.40, but when you include the 1%, it comes like 0.55. So it's, well, let me say that, it has been estimated for the first time for Colombia, and it says that the top 1% earns 20% of Colombian income. It's one of the worst numbers in the world. Actually, it has not been estimated for many other countries. Actually, Chile comes worse. Chile comes with 30%. So they are really bad numbers. I mean, really terrible numbers, to be clear. So I think how to attack income inequality has to be at the center of a strategy. And I will just mention 2 issues that I find very important. The first one is tax reforms. The tax system has to be much more progressive. And I must say that in this regard, actually the tax reform that was adopted last year by Colombia was an advance. At the same time, the tax made clear something that I thought was a terrible number. That that in Colombia, the high wage earners only pay about 5% of income in taxes, more or less independently of income. So the the most richer pay almost the same as a normal wage earner. I thought that was a terrible number, and it should be 25%, 30%, at least. It put a minimum progressive level, which I think is an advance and which has to be. I thought it was actually a very wise strategy of not attacking individual tax privileges, but rather establishing a minimum tax. But this is only the beginning. I think we have to discuss much further how to improve because in all countries that redistribute income significantly, I would say the two basic elements are redistributed taxation, which at the same time generates income to have much more transfers. And that way you can redistribute. In developed countries, you distribute, you actually reduce the Gini coefficient by 15 percentage points or so in many countries. In Latin America, we generally reduce it by 0. Or the other way, by 0. I mean, Colombia is like 1 point of Gini coefficient, the tax reform estimate. So that I want to underscore that first point. And the second point that I want to underscore, which is actually one of the legacies of Colombia, is the huge rural income gap. I think that is probably the, if we want to concentrate on how to improve inequality, I mean, it comes very clearly in the numbers on extreme poverty, but, and let me say very clearly, there are two frustrations here. One frustration is called land reform, okay? I, as Minister of Agriculture, passed the last land reform of Colombia. The Law 160 of 1993, and there is history of tax reform. But in their implementation, they have been rather poor. This administration actually passed the land restitution law, which I consider the #1 law that this government has passed. The Santos administration, I hope it succeeds in that regard. And I hope the discussions in Havana will bring something interesting in relation to the rural sector, because that I think is the worst in our distribution problem. And by the way, there has been a lot of discussion on this concept called the Zona de Reserva Campesina, the peasant reservation zones, which I must say is my idea. It was my idea. I introduced it into that land reform law. It's a mechanism by which there are areas of the country that can be established by the state by which only small holdings can prevail in that part of the country. Unfortunately, I think FARC has made a terrible proposal to some or less take the security out of those zones and to leave the which I think is a terrible concept, of course. The state should guarantee security in every inch of the territory. But that's an interesting concept, and I hope that's the basis for some advance now. My second point is that advances in this area are long-term advances, and I think we have many areas. I mean, when I looked at the multidimensional poverty, for example, it has fallen from about 60% in the mid 1990s to a bit less than like now less than 30%. I think that's a significant advance. Previous to that, we didn't have that measure, but we have these unmet basic needs, and there was significant reduction in that, which is more or less the equivalent to the current measure of multidimensional poverty. And I think we can be proud of certain things that we have done, sometimes from long ago. For example, the Instituto Colombiano de Bienestar Familiar, which is from the 1960s, is one of the best institutions of its kind in Latin America, for early childhood. It has done very novel things through the decades, let's say it has existed. And I think from the reforms of the 1990s, I will bring two, which I think have been very important. The one is the health reform, which is part of the Social Security reform of 1993, and as Lina said, the subsidized health system that it created, and which has been the basis for one of the most important advances in coverage of health services in Latin America and probably in the world. I mean, when you think before we adopted that law, you know, the poorest quintile had like 5% access to this, you know, so the health system. Now it has 80%. I mean, that's a huge advance. I mean, I think significant reduction of that multidimensional poverty has that behind it. This is the result of many administrations. I was looking at the data, and actually I found that there are two big jumps were in the Samper administration and in the first Uribe administration. And as a result of that, we went from 5, let's say, to 80%. It's a significant advance. Of course, there is a problem of organization that is now on the table. And I see the discussions going on under the very capable health minister of Colombia. I think it should lead into a very good solution to that problem. And the third that I want to underscore, and which is, you know, probably some of you may be more critical, is decentralization. The amount of resources that were given to the localities, was a huge jump in terms of redistribution of government resources within the country. And of course, there are many problems. There are many corrupt local officials, et cetera, et cetera. There are also corrupt national officials, for that matter. But I think the idea that is the responsibility of the local governments to improve local conditions is important. I think the results have been good. In terms of the coverage of basic services, there has been a significant improvement, which I think is associated to the decentralization laws. And I underscore this because there's always the temptation from the national government, and it was a temptation that President Uribe did not resist, for example, to control more from the national government. I would say the philosophy of the 1991 Constitution, which I, as a government official, had to start implementing at the time I was in government, we said, no, we will bet for decentralization. And I think the country, Colombia is a very complex country, very heterogeneous country. It should bet more on decentralization and supporting local governments rather than trying to do things from the national government. Okay. Now, there are other areas in which, however, I think there are many recent initiatives which I applaud. The idea of having an office associated to the government, now the Department for the Social Prosperity, but it had different, different incarnations before. I actually think it was born actually with the Red de Solidaridad Social in the Samper administration, and then continued under different names. I think that's a good idea. I don't like the multiplication of agencies around the presidency, but at least this one with the National Planning Department and is I think critical for these efforts. But there are many more things to do, and I think, for example, I will only underscore one problem, which is the quality of education, as a really major problem, and the other is, as I mentioned before, the organization of the health system, which I think was the weak part of our health reforms in the 1990s. But I want to underscore that this is, I understand that each administration has to have its own idea and his own contribution to this effort. I welcome that. For example, the Red Unidos is for example, one seal of this administration. I think it's a great idea. It's not the only in the Latin America. For example, Chile Solidario is a very similar institution. But I think it's a really good idea. But let me say, the most important here is the long-term effort through many governments, because this is a long-term problem of Colombia. And finally, let me underscore the issue of growth. I see the poverty strategy has this idea of the indirect and the direct And the indirect is the growth, let's say the growth strategy. And there are many good things about the growth strategy. I particularly see a significant advance under this administration with some lags in infrastructure. I guess we'll see here the debate this afternoon on that topic. I think that's a very important advance. At the same time, I must say what was launched recently by the administration on housing, it was actually also a very interesting initiative. But let me say that I have been critical and, with the issue of high dependence on the minerals as a source of growth in Colombia. So the mining locomotive, I am very skeptical of how much it really is a locomotive, or rather an obstacle to many other, other things. Actually, because I would just emphasize the following: if as a result of the booming mining that we currently have, we end up with an overvalued exchange rate, which destroys employment in manufacturing and the rural sector, which is the most affected of all sectors. Is a mixed blessing, at least. And that's what we're having now. I mean, the fact that we have mining boom and a striker of the coffee growers, which we had never seen in Colombia this year, is a problematic. I mean, it should raise a lot of question marks about what is going on. I see that the administration is trying to correct this problem, but let me see that mining is, in my way of thinking, is under tax in Colombia, significantly under tax. We have given lots of giveaways to the mining companies of Colombia, foreign and domestic, in the most impressive boom of mineral prices in history, and that's a topic that I study, so I can really say that the last 10 years have been the best real mining prices since the First World War, so it's one in 100 years. And I think we have undertax, significantly undertax mining, in fact giving a lot of giveaways to many mining companies which don't deserve it, don't need it, actually, for that matter. And this is a problem which the tax reform actually did a very interesting thing, which was to substitute let's say, contribution to Social Security on wages to a contribution based on profits, which will be paid to a large extent by mining companies. Actually, that's one of the elements that I like most about that tax reform from last year. But this is an area in which I would say the critical issue is what the government can do for the exchange rate, because that is the source of the manufacturing employment, that is the source of the employment in the rural sector, which I think are absolutely critical, not only for the issue that we're discussing here, but also for the what is going to happen next when mining prices start to fall, as they are falling now, and they will fall further as the Chinese economy slows down. And I think we are not very well prepared for that scenario. So I wanted to say that that pillar is, on the one hand, yes, working well in the sense that we are growing. There is a strategy, and the recent measures taken by the government, I think, are positive in that regard. But there is a risk that our manufacturing sector and agricultural sector will weaken. I would say one of the strengths of Colombia as an economy is diversification. And if we lose that asset, we are in trouble. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jose Antonio Ocampo. We will be taking a 10-minute coffee break, and then come back for our discussion. Before we do, I just wanted to follow up and perhaps put an issue on the table for our discussion when we come back, and in many ways following up on what Jose Antonio has just talked about, and that is the complementarity or lack of complementarity between economic policy and social development policy, particularly given the investment in mining and the possibility of returning to a kind of boom and bust economy. At the same time, we're all aware of the importance of sustainability of social development programs. And I wonder if that might be a place where our panel can begin in thinking about, we've got some wonderful models here for social development policy. Is Colombia pursuing economic policies that will make it possible to sustain them? So I want to thank everyone on the panel for just a superb panorama of poverty and poverty reduction programs and some of the challenges lying ahead. Welcome you all to some coffee outside, and then welcome you back in 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.